Welcome everyone, I'm Spiro with another update and perspective on the coronavirus as we are now 2.5 months into the outbreak originating in Wuhan, China. Now at the beginning of the coronavirus outbreak, I reported how just weeks before the first reports of the virus began to come in, a pandemic exercise called Event 201 simulating a global coronavirus outbreak was held in New York City. The United Nations, the World Health Organization, the World Economic Forum, the American and Chinese CDC, the media, major banks, vaccine manufacturers, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation all participated. Now, the events of the simulation are almost eerily prophetic, as we are now seeing the same players living out the simulation as the virus known as COVID-19 is reported to have spread to dozens of countries, and 760 million people in China alone are on lockdown. Now, that is more than 10% of the entire world's population. Let that sink in for a moment. Then we learn that the same day that Event 201 took place in New York City, the Military World Games was holding its opening ceremonies, hosting 110 nations and thousands of military members from around the world in Wuhan, China, what we now know to be as ground zero of the outbreak, again just weeks before the virus was first reported. Now, as more and more scientists and experts raise their concerns that the virus may have come from the Level 4 bioweapons lab located there in Wuhan, China, in my previous report, we explored the possibility that a foreign military or intelligence operation could have used the military Olympic type of event as cover to carry out a covert operation, unleashing the biowarfare agent, knowing that if the truth eventually came out about the virus being weaponized, the nearby Level 4 lab would take the blame. Now, is this the perfect cover or just another coincidence? Now let's take a closer look at the opening ceremonies for the Military World Games held in Wuhan, China on the same day that the UN coronavirus simulation was in New York City. Now, when I had seen the UN-themed portion of the opening ceremonies in Wuhan, which is ground zero for the coronavirus outbreak, taking place on the same day as the UN-themed coronavirus outbreak simulation, I have to admit I was amazed, and I have a hard time believing that this is just one big coincidence. But this was not the only major military and defense event to take place in China during this time frame. As reported by Logical Annie, the 9th Jingshan Forum was held 2 days later in Beijing. It was a UN type of forum with over 500 delegates from 76 nations. And at this forum, China's defense minister spoke out about China's reunification with Taiwan as being a top priority, which no nation can stop. He went on to blast the U.S. for selling arms to Taiwan. China's defense minister also accused the U.S. of inciting a color revolution in Hong Kong. As we see, the coronavirus outbreak has crippled China, with more than half of its population on some type of lockdown. China's economy has grind to a halt, as we see many nations closing its doors to China and Chinese goods. On the heels of the U.S.-China trade war, China, the world's largest economy, is now at a standstill. Now, this opens a door and a vacuum for another country to take its place at the top, a move the U.S. hopes to capitalize upon. Now, as China was also hit by a massive case of bird flu and killed off large portions of its chickens, China was forced to lift the ban on U.S. poultry imports. Now, the recent 5G rollout and U.S. battle with Chinese telecom giant Huawei still lingers in the air. One of China's biggest exports has been hit exceptionally hard: telecom hardware, computers, and electronics, as the Wuhan-based Huawei takes a major hit. Yeah, that's right. Huawei has a major headquarters right there in Ground Zero, Wuhan, China. Now, these are just a couple of examples of how the U.S. could potentially benefit, as China is now crippled by this outbreak, as this will force many nations to either become more independent and not rely so heavily upon China, or look elsewhere. Now, President Trump has been saying throughout his presidency that he intends to bring industry and jobs back to the U.S. Now, whether this is all just a big coincidence or not, this freezes America's #1 economic enemy, China, at least for the moment, temporarily. But we cannot disregard the UN's fingerprints on this crisis, as this opens up the door for more global control and a cashless society potentially, as we see China already removing its paper fiat currency for possible virus contamination, just as the world's central banks are about to launch their own central bank digital currencies. This appears to be playing right into the UN's global governance agenda, the 2030 agenda, Agenda 21, as a deadly pandemic could be used to justify pretty much anything they want. And don't forget, whatever rights you think you have disappear once an emergency is declared.
The average person touches their face 3 to 5 times every waking minute. In between, we're touching doorknobs, water fountains, and each other.
Beth.
Mom?
No, go up to your room, honey.
So we have a virus with no treatment protocol and no vaccine at this time.
Is there any way someone could weaponize the bird flu? Is that what we're looking at?
Someone doesn't have to weaponize the bird flu. The birds are doing that.
Watch this. It's transmission, so we just need to know which direction.
On day 1, there were 2 people, and then 4, and then 16. In 3 months, it's 1 billion. That's where we're headed.
They're calling out the National Guard. They're moving the president underground. People will panic.
Get away!
It will tip over.
The truth is being kept from the world.
Cook your samples, destroy everything.
Please don't tell the supervisor I have the flu. I've been working with a shattered pelvis for 3 weeks.
Oh, my juice loosener's never gonna come.
Hey, Dad, this came for you in the mail.
Woohoo! Mother, get an extra special hug ready. I bought you a new juicer. Good Lord. Flu germs entering every orifice in my head.
Happy birthday. Happy birthday.
What the?
The line between disinformation and misinformation is not always an easy one to find.
Governments need to be willing to do things that are out of their historical perspective, or for the most part, it's really a war footing that we need to be on.
It can happen quickly. A Marshall-type plan, don't mean to say that exactly, but a Marshall plan that can go into effect
can stimulate change very quickly.
The distrust relates to the health system more generally.
A step up from the part of the government on enforcement actions against fake news.
I think a couple of things we have to consider are, even before this began, the anti-vaccine movement was very strong, and this is something specifically through social media that has spread.
Welcome to Event 201.
Which took place in New York City on October 18th, 2019. Event 201 is a high-level pandemic exercise hosted by the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security in partnership with the World Economic Forum and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Now, in this report, I will play several clips from Event 201, but I will provide the links below so you can see the pandemic exercise in its entirety, which is nearly 5 hours if you wish to do so. I personally watched every second of it. Now, I believe that this report is directly connected to my recent report on global institutions and governments which are currently pimping the United Nations Climate Agenda program, which seeks to consolidate political and economic power into the hands of the ruling elite. That report is titled The UN and Central Banks, a Rockefeller and Rothschild Coup. And the follow-up to that report, exposing how George Soros is actively bankrolling campaigns to censor content creators on YouTube, which question the legitimacy of man-made climate change, which in my view, based on my research, is nothing more than a false pretext for global regulations, global taxations, consolidation of power and natural resources, in addition to population control and global governance. Another fascinating connection is the fact that not only did Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation participate in and help set up the pandemic simulation of the coronavirus outbreak, they also just so happened to fund the group, the very group who owns the patent to the deadly coronavirus and are already working on a vaccine to solve the current crisis. Again, an incredible coincidence, I know. Now, the members of the Emergency Epidemic Board in this simulation consist of representatives from major banks, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Johnson & Johnson, logistical powerhouses, the media, as well as officials from China and Americans' Center for Disease Control, just to name a few. Now, this simulation also includes news reports, which were fabricated just for this exercise. Please keep that in mind because they are eerily similar to reports we are currently seeing regarding the real-world coronavirus outbreak.
But now it's spreading rapidly throughout local communities. International travel has turned local epidemics into a pandemic spanning the globe. Just 3 months ago, CAP started in South America, but has now reached several countries with more than 30,000 cases and nearly 2,000 deaths.
Now, this pandemic simulation was broken up into 5 segments ranging from transportation and trade to communications and continuity of infrastructure. Some of the most shocking material is in segment 4 regarding communications. Let's take a quick look. Again, this is a simulation of a coronavirus outbreak which took place only 6 weeks before the actual coronavirus outbreak.
Global health experts have highlighted that dis and misinformation are wreaking havoc on the CAP's response. Health workers are under attack in a number of locations due to rumors that they are purposely spreading the disease. And response efforts in many places have had to be suspended because of concerns around violence. Pharmaceutical companies are being accused of introducing the CAPS virus so they can make money on drugs and vaccines, and have seen public faith in their products plummet. Unrest due to false rumors and divisive messaging is rising and is exacerbating spread of the disease as levels of trust fall and people stop cooperating with response efforts. This is a massive problem, one that threatens governments and trusted institutions. National governments are considering or have already implemented a range of interventions to combat misinformation. Some governments have taken control of national access to the internet. Others are censoring websites and social media content. And a small number have shut down internet access completely to prevent the spread of misinformation. Penalties have been put in place for spreading harmful falsehoods, including arrests.
Alarming news emerging from social media companies today about the CAPS pandemic. Twitter and Facebook are reporting they've identified and deleted a disturbing number of accounts dedicated to spreading disinformation about the outbreak. For more on this, we go to our correspondent, Catalina Parks.
Chen, these accounts were created by several state-sponsored groups intending to sow political discord, and some individuals are seemingly seeking to gain financial advantages. Violence against healthcare workers and minority populations has been increasing. A recent riot highlights the real danger in these posts. Countries are reacting in different ways as to how best to manage the overwhelming amounts of dis and misinformation circulating over the internet. In some cases, limited internet shutdowns are being implemented to quell panic.
How much control of information should there be, and by whom? And how can false information be effectively challenged? And what if that false information is coming from companies or from governments?
The team has been monitoring the public response, and on various social media channels and cable networks, there's been some conspiracy theories that are around about the potential that pharmaceutical companies or the UN have released this for their own benefit. So as we move forward, obviously trust in pharmaceuticals and government is very important at this moment. And so as we move forward with developing the right scenarios, we have to make sure that the public communication is a major part of that because of these conspiracy theories.
As you can see, the subject of dominating and controlling information is a top priority. While I understand that fake news is and can be very dangerous and damaging, we must keep in mind that governments and the media have an extensive track record of dishonesty and selling outright lies to the public all of the time. Now, in this simulation, the Pandemic Emergency Board goes on to decide that a centralized source of information led by the World Health Organization, which falls under the United Nations, is the only way to ensure that they can control information in order to combat fake news, misinformation, and disinformation. Now, that means news reports like this one, which counter the official story, warning that a deadly virus could potentially escape a level 4 biolab in Wuhan, China, and cause an outbreak is possible. And wouldn't you know it, another coincidence. Yeah, the city of Wuhan, China is the same city where this level 4 biolab is located and appears to be ground zero of this real-world coronavirus outbreak. And currently millions of people are under quarantine as this virus is reportedly spread to more than 10 countries. Please do your own research. I do not have any vested interests. This channel is not monetized, so I do not profit financially or in any way, really. I do this on my own time. I have a busy life, but this is my passion, and this is what I do. Now, like any good detective, one must always ask, who stands to gain from this? Is this all just a coincidence, or is there something else going on? Now, sadly, channels like mine and many others probably will not be around for too much longer, so please be sure to follow me on alternative sites like BitChute, where I post all my videos. I'm also on Twitter. For how long is anybody's guess, so I set up an account on Gab. Now, both BitChute and Gab both pride themselves on not censoring content. You can also find my work at activistpost.com. Please share this report far and wide. For now, I will leave you with another couple clips from this pandemic simulation. I'm Spiro. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for more.
Continuing our coverage of the newly discovered CAPS disease and the scope of its deadly outbreaks. There are now more than 30,000 reported cases. Experts warn this may be just the beginning of a global problem. GNN science reporters have produced a video about what we know so far about CAPS, the virus, the outbreak, and the resulting chaos.
CAPS is a novel coronavirus related to those viruses that caused the frightening SARS epidemic in 2003 and the deadly MERS outbreaks in recent years. Scientists think each infected person in turn infects on average 2 more people. This disease is proving more transmissible than SARS or MERS and about as contagious as influenza. Essentially, the cumulative number of cases is doubling every week. At this rate, we can expect to see 16 times as many cases in a month unless we find a way to interrupt transmission. The virus appears to be spreading rapidly in densely populated and impoverished neighborhoods in some megacities in South America. CAPS is a serious respiratory disease. More than half of the recognized cases have required hospital care, creating a huge strain on healthcare systems. The fatality rate is about 10%. For comparison, CAPS is about as lethal as SARS and 2 to 4 times more lethal than the 1918 influenza pandemic, the worst pandemic on record. Even so, some people only exhibit mild flu-like symptoms, not requiring treatment in a hospital. Alarmingly, those people are able to walk around and spread the virus, not realizing they are doing so. Even worse, international travelers have been arriving at their destinations symptom-free, but within a matter of hours, becoming ill. Travel-related cases have blossomed into outbreaks in a number of locations and have quickly grown faster than health authorities could respond and contain them. Global public health experts are very concerned about this disease because it appears the virus is readily transmitted through the air from person to person. Essentially, all people are susceptible. Experts agree unless it is quickly controlled, it could lead to a severe pandemic, an outbreak that circles the globe and affects people everywhere. Models developed by leading public health authorities indicate a CAPS pandemic could lead to an outcome worse than the 1918 influenza, which killed 50 to 100 million people worldwide. Given the global population is 4 times larger than it was in 1918, if these models prove accurate, we could be looking at hundreds of millions of deaths over the next year or two. The outcome of the CAPS pandemic in Event 201 was catastrophic. 65 million people died in the first 18 months. The outbreak was small at first and initially seemed controllable, but then it started spreading in densely crowded and impoverished neighborhoods of megacities. From that point on, the spread of the disease was explosive. Within 6 months, cases were occurring in nearly every country. The global economy was in a free fall. The GDP down 11%. Stock markets around the world plummeted between 20 and 40% and headed into a downward cycle of fear and low expectation. Businesses were not borrowing, banks were not lending. Everyone was just hoping to hunker down and weather the storm. Economists say the economic turmoil caused by such a pandemic will last for years, perhaps a decade. The societal impacts, the loss of faith in government, the distrust of news, and the breakdown of social cohesion could last even longer.
Welcome to Event 201.
The president died 2 months ago, the vice president a week later. Russia no longer has a functioning government. Most of our population is dying or dead. Does Dr. Scott have what she needs to make a vaccine?
7 months ago, outside Cairo, there was an outbreak. A virus that was like nothing any of us had ever seen. When we left Norfolk, the virus was at phase 2. We are now at phase 6.
Don't touch anyone. Stay away from other people.